Hello, NDC Sydney attendees. My name is Anjuan Simmons. I'm so happy to be with you, and thanks for coming to my session. I just want to say that I've been to Sydney, Australia once in my life. My wife and I went many years ago when the Olympics were in Sydney. So that tells you it's been a long time, but I have really fond memories of that city, and I can just hope that that spirit of Sydney is with you, even though we're not in person, we're doing it virtually. But we're going to keep on going in the spirit of technology and building cool software. So let's go ahead and get into it. So, like many of you who are here, I really hope that you're like me, and that is that you believe that building software is cool. I love building software. There's just something cool about turning ideas into ones and zeros that people love and delight in. There's something just satisfying about that experience of really finding that fit between what you're building and what customers want. You know, the media has gotten into the idea that software is cool, and there's even been movies and TV shows about the software industry. And we all have this mythology of a couple of cool guys, and unfortunately, it's normally guys who are in a garage building what are now multi-billion-dollar companies. And then there is the thrill that anyone can really learn these high level languages and build some application or app that people use every day. However, there is a dark side to working in technology. And that's the reality that building software can be exhausting. And you know, people are often surprised by this because software development isn't really a physically taxing activity. We normally sit in really comfortable chairs and air conditioning office with nice mechanical keyboards and multiple monitors. And so there's not a lot of physical labor involved, right? So all of you are probably in some building somewhere that has a floor and walls and a ceiling, and there's probably like light fixtures in the ceilings. And you can imagine the labor of people who built the room that you're in right now, that they're probably toiling and sweating. And we don't really have that effect building software, but there is a cost to building software. There's a price that we pay being in this industry. Building software often requires work against deadlines that we don't always understand. And there's the pressure to always keep up with the latest state of the art. You know, I'm coming up on almost a quarter century building enterprise software for a living. And I can promise you that the technology and the tools and even a lot of the languages that existed when I started my career aren't around anymore. And so I've had to always keep up. And, you know, there was no notion of cloud computing or Kubernetes or React or any other things that are just really the state of the market now when I started. So we always have to keep sharp and stay on top of the technologies that we use every day. But then there's the pressure to always be shipping. And I'm sure that you've heard that term before. I've used that term, always be shipping, to motivate my teams. And really the thinking behind that term is that if we're always shipping features to customers, then we're always proving the value that we bring to our company and to those customers. But the reality is that any system that is always on is going to fail. And often that failure is devastating when it happens. And I'm here talking to you as someone who has been burned out, someone who has reached the end of my rope when it comes to working in software development. And these demands that are in our industry create stress, and that stress can lead to burnout. And as someone who has been an engineering manager for many development teams across multiple companies, I can tell you that as a manager, if I don't regulate the burnout level of my team, we're going to eventually see that burnout reflected in the work of the team, right? Burnout people burn out, right? They burn down valuable things. They often start introducing defects into production that they just didn't do before. They often burn down things like the communication tools that we use. And you'll see developers who are once really active in Slack, or you can see their GitHub activity slowly dwindle away as they begin to disengage from the team because they're experiencing burnout. But not only do they burn down things, they go out, right? They go out of, like I said, the communication channels. They go out of the teams. They get quiet during the daily stand up. And so you see them begin to withdraw. And so that burning and going out phenomena can be devastating to the productivity level of the team. And if the burnout level goes unchecked, then you will soon see it hurt your ability to even ship software. And always be shipping will turn to always be slipping as your team begins to slip deadline after deadline, much to the chagrin of your management team. And so I want to share with you some of the research into burnout. And that's really a lot of the literature about burnout really shows that this is something that affects multiple industries, but it is especially prevalent in software development. So let's define burnout. If we go to the issue of World Psychiatry, the June 2016 issue of World Psychiatry, you find really this great definition. And it is a psychological syndrome. I'm gonna read this. I normally don't like a lot of text and slides, but I do want to get this terminology down. But burnout is a psychological syndrome emerging as a prolonged response to chronic interpersonal stressors on the job. The three key dimensions of this response are overwhelming exhaustion, feelings of cynicism and detachment from the job, and a sense of ineffectiveness and lack of accomplishment. And you may be raising your hand right now saying, I'm sold on this concept. I'm sold because you've been through this. We're going to dive deep into these dimensions in a few slides, but a working definition to kind of get past some of the heavy words in the statement is this one. Burnout is the ongoing feeling that today's resources aren't enough to meet tomorrow's needs. Have you ever been there? Have you ever felt like, wow, I have so much work I have to do, and I can't even keep up with what I need to do today, let alone tomorrow? Well, that is a sign that you may be suffering from burnout. But burnout, while I'm passionate about the software industry because I've built software for a living, like I said, for a long time, this is not only in our industry. Burnout is something that spans multiple industries. But before we go into that, let's look at the three dimensions of burnout, right? So there's emotional exhaustion, and that's the overall lack of energy and the sense that your emotional resources are being fully consumed by work, right? This is where you get to the end of your day and you have nothing left to give. But then there is depersonalization, and that becomes the state where you become unfeeling and cynical, and you become really impersonal toward your teammates. You begin to, instead of seeing the people you work with as people, you begin to see them as problems, right? The example that I like to give is that, let's say that you hear that a friend got into a car accident. So you go to the emergency room and you say, hey, my friend was in a car accident. And then the nurse behind the desk says, oh, the broken arm, they're in room 3, right? Your friend has no longer become an actual person. They become a broken arm, right? Simply a problem that needs to be solved, right? That's how depersonalization happens. But then there's a feeling of reduced personal accomplishment. And that's when you begin to evaluate even the things you're getting done in a negative way. Have you ever been there where you've worked on something, you've checked it in, even the peer review feedback is very positive, but you're like, it's really not that great, right? Even though everyone has said that, you wrote a great PR, it's very thoughtful, very detailed, but you begin to become less and less satisfied with your own work, even when others say that is up to par. And so you get into that spiral of self-criticism. And how widespread is burnout? Well, Gallup Workplace did a survey last year. Actually, this is in 2018. And it showed that burnout is a very common problem. And in fact, 23% of the 7,500 respondents to the survey reported feeling burned out very often or always, while 44% said they felt burned out sometimes. So that means that almost 2/3 of full-time workers experience some degree of burnout, right? 2/3, that's a huge number of people who are struggling with burnout. But then you might think, well, you know what, Anjuan, that sounds cool, but you know what, my team, we're highly engaged and, we have channels in Slack where we connect. And for those of you who may be able to work in offices, I'm in the United States, so we're still struggling with COVID-19. And so it's a very kind of hit or miss thing, but I've heard other parts of the world, like parts of Australia and definitely New Zealand are doing a lot better. So you may be back in offices. And so y'all have ping pong tables and you have maybe even nice beer in the fridge. And so you're like, everyone's engaged and we love working together. Well, the truth is that even highly engaged people can be burned out. Check it out. So the University of Cambridge did a study that looked at highly engaged employees, right? These are the people who are always at the team events and they're always present around the office. I mean, they are fixtures in the office, but it turns out that actually those people may actually be really burned out. And the people who are optimally engaged may be the people who are right now thinking of leaving their jobs. And I'm sure that many of you have seen that. You have that person who is like always there, the life of the party, and then one day they say, "I'm out." Right? I'm giving my 2 weeks notice, so I'm leaving. You're like, well, what happened? Well, this was a highly engaged person who got burned out. And the article goes on to say that the highest turnover intentions were reported by this highly engaged, exhausted group. And by engaged and exhausted, they mean that the people who are highly engaged, but also deeply exhausted. So engagement is not a cure or a protection from burnout. And so let's get into some of the individual cost of burnout, right? Mayo Clinic did a study about burnout and it found just a list of symptoms, right? There is fatigue and high blood pressure, right? And so people come into the hospital and the blood pressure is sky high. They're tired all the time. But then there are even the physiological aspects of burnout. There's the psychological aspects, right? There's sadness, being irritable, anger, even being rage. Have you ever had someone like flip a table at work, like literally flip a table? Well, that person may have been going through burnout. But then there's obviously sick days and trips to the doctor. And so we find out that if burnout goes unchecked, there is a real health cost. And that health cost comes out in productivity, right? Your team won't be very productive if half the team is in the emergency room or half the team is having high blood pressure where they're becoming dizzy, even though they might be sitting at their desk at work. And so these are really serious symptoms that add up to create real world ramifications that have a direct impact on both the work we do for our companies, but also our personal lives. Right. But then there are the corporate costs of burnout. Right. So Harvard Business School did a study and it showed that there are national health costs that come into play when people are burned out. And they did a study and they found that about $190 billion can be attributed to burnout. Right. That's a huge chunk of change. And they found that the biggest risk factor in these costs were high demands at work, which account for an estimated $48 billion in spending, right? People are so burned out that companies are spending money to compensate for the fact that people are burned out. And so we see this huge cost that people have to pay because they are burned out. And this affects directly the bottom line of companies. And so this shows you that this is really a big problem. And this is not on the slide, but one study that we found that approximately 120,000 people die each year from stress at work. 120,000 people. Can you imagine? And this is just in the United States. This isn't even speaking globally. And so because there is such a widespread cost to burnout and such a massive expenditure of money, it's not very surprising that there are common solutions to burnout, right? So I want to pause here and just think about all these people who have died due to burnout and all these billions of dollars. It makes you wonder, is this talk about burnout or is it about Thanos, right? Right after the snap, right? I mean, it's just devastating how massive burnout can be in terms of the problems that it brings to our society. So there are lots of common solutions that people do, and we generally think about them at the corporate and the individual level. I'm going to go into these solutions and really give a sense of why they really fall up short, right? These fall short. So let's start with the corporate solutions. Now, I've been very privileged as someone who speaks at a lot of tech events to walk into the offices of companies all around the world. I've been at the software companies all around the world, right? I've been to GitHub in San Francisco. I've been to Mailchimp in Atlanta. I've been to Prezi in Budapest. And you know what? These offices are so posh and so impressive. And so you see how much thoughtfulness and intentionality went into the designs of these offices. I've seen the amenities at these offices, right? Free lunches and game rooms and just stacked refrigerators, free meals on certain days, right? These offices are often designed by the executives to keep the team motivated. And in many ways, these offices are designed to help developers feel like royalty. But you know what? Sometimes royalty ends up at the red wedding. And then when that happens, there's nothing you can do to pick up the pieces of the people who have been devastated by the stress levels that they're going through. And so corporations also exist to really deliver financial benefits to the shareholders who have invested in that company. And the reason that corporate efforts to solve burnout fall short is because often when there's a bump in the economy, and a lot of economies are going through a bump right now, often the first things that are cut are these amenities and these programs. And so when I had to come up with a framework for solving burnout, I really found these corporate solutions really wanting that when companies hit hard times, they usually jettison these ideas. And so they're not very effective. So since corporations often fall short, then individuals try to remediate their burnout levels. And so people try to get away. So they may choose to go on a vacation, or they may try to do certain things to deal with the stress. In fact, some people may go to excess by abusing things like food and drugs and alcohol, or we go to escapism to just practice self-care. But even that can be stressful. There's been a startling number of reports of people who are falling off the Grand Canyon trying to take the perfect selfie, right? Because so many times we're working hard on vacation to show how much we're not working, right? And so it's so wild to see people doing things to endanger their lives to just do something for Instagram. And so we see that these individual efforts fall short. We see these corporate efforts fall short, and we really need a different framework. And so I normally get this talk with my wife, who couldn't join me today. So my wife and I thought that we needed to have a framework to address burnout. And so we came up with this 3-part framework for addressing burnout. So we wanted something that was effective, but did not require a lot of resources and a lot of privilege to access. And so we found this 3-part plan that was very effective in our lives. And as I began to share these practices and principles with the software development teams that I lead, I was able to see that, wow, these really are working. And again, they can be done by individuals with very little cost. And so I'm going to go through the part of the framework. And for each part, I'm going to go a little bit deeper into if companies do want to try to throw in some resources, then they can, but it's meant to be a lightweight framework that is effective. And then for each one, I'm going to go into what my wife and I call the one thing you simply must do, right? And that's the one thing that if you don't get anything from this, right, you want to write down that one thing when I get there. Now, the inspiration for why this talk is called Managing the Burnout is because as someone who's done a lot of Agile software development and managed Agile teams, I've worked with a lot of Burndown charts. And so I'm going to go through a Burndown chart. Most of you have seen this before. You probably look at them every day. But for those of you who may not have seen them, let me explain it. A Burndown chart is a simple chart with 2 axes, right? The x-axis is time, right? Normally measured in days. And then the y-axis is work, measured in some factor. I like to use story points when I use burn down charts, but you might use something else. And so the idea is that you have this ideal line, which represents that if you evenly burn down the work over the course of this iteration, which is often called a sprint, then it'll get down to 0, right? So that ideal line represents really a perfect burn down of work. And so as time goes on, you get the work hopefully burning down, that the amount of work not done goes down until you eventually get a set of work that you're working on. And so as I worked with Agile teams and I looked at burn down charts, and I spent many nights looking at them and wondering, are we above, are we behind? But I realized that I needed to burn down more than just work. That as I worked with my teams, I needed to burn down things that were causing them to burn out. And so this talk came from the metaphor of the burn down chart. We're going to get into the 3 things that as managers, if you're a manager, you should really be hyper focused on burning down these things. But if you're an individual contributor, you too should also be really focused on burning down these things. So the first part of the framework is what we call burning down barriers. And that means that we burn down the things that keep us away from people. Everyone needs a network of people to just walk through life with us, right? Humans are built for relationships. This is a very common cliche, but I think it's true. And it says that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. And that just speaks to the fact that human relationships are a key way to protect yourself from burnout. And so it's really important that if you are at a company where you have the power to affect the environment, that you really have a culture where people feel empowered to share their ideas. But even if you're not a manager, right, one of the ways that you can keep relationships fresh is to just recognize what people do, right? So many people are so motivated by recognition, and you will be surprised that by just recognizing what your teammates are doing, by saying, hey, Mohammed did a great job with that release, or you know what, Sandy really helped us with our CI/CD pipelines, and they're much more efficient, and we are much more autonomous. Just recognize what people do, right? That's one way that you can burn down barriers. And so this is really something that you can hopefully do right now, that you can begin to strengthen the relationships of the people who you work with. Maybe you came to NDC Sydney with your colleagues, and I know that it's tough to do things in COVID-19, but finding ways to work together. I know my company, Help Scout, we found a lot of ways to socialize over Zoom and in Slack. In fact, we play a game called Werewolf, which some of you play. Some people call it Mafia. We played over Zoom, and I wrote a blog post that I can share. People want to know about how you can play Werewolf over Zoom. And so that happened because we realized that we needed to have a way to play games and to have fun with each other, with coworkers. And if we could find a way to have fun together as coworkers, then we found that that had a direct impact in how effectively we work together. Now, what's the one thing you simply must do? Well, that's have regular meetings one-on-one with people who you work with. Now, again, at Help Scout, we do something called a fika, which is spelled Fika. And fika is a Swedish term. There's not a direct translation, but it means really to take a break from work, get maybe a nice cup of coffee and a pastry, and just connect with someone. And then the practices of fika that Help Scout has used has led me from connections with my team members and even with people who aren't even in engineering, right? With people in marketing and sales. And that practice has been so powerful. So if you want something to take with you, I highly recommend Fika. Some people use an application in Slack called Donut, which will automatically pair people together. That's a great low-cost way to have those interactions be both spontaneous and real. And so, again, the one thing you simply must do to burn down barriers is to find ways to connect weekly with the people who you work with. All right. So the next thing that you need to burn down are distractions. And, you know, there are almost an infinite number of things that can distract you, that can take your attention away. And the reality, though, is that your attention is not a finite resource. So it's very important that we align our attention with our values. Now, this is challenging because technology, even though technology is amazing, technology has blurred the division between work and home, right? A century ago, when most people worked in factories, you couldn't bring work home with you, right? If your job was putting together Model Ts or putting together cars, you couldn't take that car home and finish work, right? You pretty much had to only do that at the factory. And similarly, if you had a great record collection at home 100 years ago, you probably couldn't take it to work, right? But now we can easily take work home. In fact, most of us, due to COVID, we're working at home now. And so there's really no barrier between work and home. And so by doing that, it's very easy to fall into a stance where you're always on, you're always working, and that leads to stress. And if unmanaged, that stress can lead to burnout. And so one thing that is important to do is to understand a simple concept. You have to understand the power of no. And that means that you have to say no to things that are not aligned with your values. And everyone here, you have some values, and those are the things that make your heart sing, Those are the things that you do without even thinking about it. Those are the things that you would do for free because you love them so much. And as you take an inventory of your values, it's critical to align your life with those values. And that means that you're going to have to say no to a lot of things. That might mean that you have to say no to some relationships that are toxic, that don't serve you well. You may have to say no to some projects that are on your plate, but are overwhelming you. You may have to say no to certain bad habits and do make changes to your nutrition. You might have to say no to that Big Mac and no to that can of soda, right? It's really important that we begin to remove things from our lives that are not aligned with the things that really bring us joy. And so one thing that you simply must do, the one thing in this area, and I highly recommend this, is take a break from social media. And I know some of you are like gasping right now, right? Maybe you dropped your phone. I really recommend, not forever, but just take a break from Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Snapchat, whatever you use. Take a break. I recommend a month. I think a month is a suitable time for all of the shaking to stop as you withdraw from social media and then really feel the benefits. But if you can't do a month, then I recommend that at the very least you put it in a time box and you say, you know what? At this time of day, between 9 in the morning and 10 in the morning, I'll check my social media, get my fix, but then I'm done until the next day. And if you do that, you'll be amazed at how much of your mental space opens up and you'll be able to think more clearly. You may think that, wow, that bug I've been struggling with, the fix becomes obvious. And then so many of the distractions that are taking away from your limited attention begin to go away. And then your precious attention begins to be aligned with the things that really move the needle in your work. So you have to burn down distractions and focus on what's really valuable. And the final thing that you need to burn down is illness, right? And that is because we all have human bodies, right? And often software developers, we trade health for productivity, right? We give up some health. We may not sleep very well. We may not eat very well because we want to get that code shipped. We want to get that thing done. But often you're only setting up future losses of productivity because the body remembers, the body never forgets. At some point, the body is going to make you pay for doing that. And so burnout takes a toll on our bodies. But if we improve our health, then we will be able to build up the resistance to the effects of burnout, right? Those are things like getting regular exercise. Those are things like learning how to have better nutrition. And so the one thing you simply must do is get enough sleep, right? And I know it sounds simple. You're like, well, wait a minute, that's obvious. No, your brain needs sleep. And so many things that contribute to brain fog and the inability to concentrate are because you're not sleeping. And we say this because sleeping is free, right? Hopefully you all live in neighborhoods or you have environments where you can at least sleep without fear of assault or being attacked. But what I would say is try to add at least one more hour of sleep each night than what you're getting now. And that means setting your alarm maybe a little bit later. That might mean going to sleep a little bit earlier. You will be amazed at how powerful sleep is. And one kind of pro tip that my wife and I started doing is that we have a playlist in Google Play Music, which is now YouTube Music, of just rain sounds, right? It's like a 2-hour loop of rain sounds. And by playing that basically white noise, my sleep quality has gone up, right? And so it's very important that you get enough sleep, right? So I hope you're feeling that that's pretty simple, right? I need to meet with people one-on-one. I need to get enough sleep, and I need to learn to say no. And it seems simple, but in the implementation details, right, that's where it gets really challenging. Now, I want to go back to this ideal line, because I love ideal lines, right? Whenever I was working with teams, and if we were below the line or above the line, I would get a sense of, are we going to make it right? Do we get the work that we committed to at the beginning of the sprint done? And I would often obsess over the ideal line. But then I realized over time that if I see the team falling behind early in the sprint, I understand that within certain tolerances, the team's going to catch up. And I realized that I didn't need to really stress myself out about this ideal line. But the ideal line is meant to be a guide for the team. But if you can balance things out and not worry about perfection, then you won't let the ideal line haunt you like it used to haunt me. And so this tolerance range also applies to stress. You may say, you know what, there are times when, right, it's go time at my job and I can't say no because we got to get this release out. We're 3 months behind schedule. We got to get this going. I understand that, right? I work in self-development too. I've had CEOs yell at me for why things aren't where they're supposed to be. And I know that there are times when you have to do that, where you have to sacrifice some of the things that I've shared with, but you have to check in with yourself. And you have to say, you know what? I'm not doing a good job with my health right now, or I'm not doing enough with my relationship right now. I'm going to make sure that once we get this release out, I'm going to commit to renewing my relationships. I'm going to commit to investing in my health. I'm going to commit to really being focused. And that's only possible if you take the time to check in with yourself. Many of you know about the sprint or the Scrum practice known as the sprint retrospective, right? Most of you do retros. That's a great personal practice too, that just put in your calendar, maybe not every 2 weeks, maybe, not once a month, but I wouldn't go longer than 6 weeks of just not checking in with yourself and just say, you know what, I'm going to do a self retro. I'm going to try to see how am I doing with my health? How am I doing with my focus? How am I doing with my relationships? And you know what? I need to go ahead and book that meeting with my brother or my sister or my loved one or my friend. Or you know what? I'm gonna get back into the gym, right? And so it's okay to go outside and be unaligned with this framework, but you have to have some check so that you can see when you're getting outside the tolerance range and then you're going to go into burnout. You have to monitor that so you can make the corrections to be able to get back to where you are. And that takes an honest interrogation of the reality of your life. So you don't have to perfectly manage your stress levels. You just need to be committed to the regular practices that protect your relationships, your time, and your health. All right. So often when I give this talk, typically this is where I would end, but over time, and because we have time in this session, and when I have more than like half an hour to share, people come up to me and I say, that all sounds great, but you know what? I'm dealing with scarce resources. And so what can your framework do for me? Well, I'm glad that you asked, right? So, we try to, that one thing you simply must do is really a way to simplify things, but to take it even further, to take it deeper into when you're really limited, I have a couple of ideas for you, right? So I want to share something with you, and I want to make a confession. I am an introvert, right? I've given talks in front of thousands of people, so you're like, wait a minute, you can't be an introvert. I am a classical introvert. That means that I am drained by being around lots of people. I am drained by being in loud environments. And whenever I go to a conference and I give my talk and I love helping people, so that's why I do it. And then I hang around for Q&A and I'm swarmed usually by people, and it's very nice. But I go up to my hotel room usually and I collapse for 3 hours because I'm drained by that. And so I'm really speaking to my fellow introverts out there. I know it can be hard to have relationships and to be around people, but it is still vitally important, even if you are an introvert, to cultivate healthy relationships. And you can do it. You can do it. And one way, if you have the scarcity of extroversion, like me, because we're introverts, then one thing that you can do, and a simple way to burn down barriers in your life, is to volunteer. And that means that you find some cause that speaks to you. Maybe it's with children, maybe it's with people who are sick, maybe it's with your religion. But I can promise you that you can find some way to volunteer your time. And what you do by doing that is that you find a circle of people who are doing something that's bigger than your individual self. And then by getting out and being involved, you're contributing to hopefully a great cause, but you're forming relationships around something that you're really passionate about. And when I've been able to volunteer and the volunteer activity that I do now, they really enrich my life. And so this is a powerful way and a simple way. Typically, these people really they provide everything. You just need to show up. But by doing that, by volunteering, contributing to these charities, you can find some way and find a group of people that are aligned with your purpose and your passions, and you can work together. And actually, the feeling that you're making a difference in the world is a great way to fight burnout, right? That's a great way to deal with stress. So this is a very low cost way to get involved. So I highly recommend that you find some volunteer effort. A lot of these groups are meeting virtually, or they're able to say, hey, we're going to meet outside in a well ventilated area. Everyone wears masks, but we're going to pack lunches for the poor people. We're going to do something like that. The people are getting really, really crafty and scrappy in making sure that COVID-19 does it in people's volunteerism. All right. So that's one low cost way that you can burn down barriers. All right. So you talk about distractions, right? You might be saying, well, I have a hard time saying no. What's a low cost way to do that? Even if you can't say no to everything, you can say yes to a journal. And so this sounds like a simple practice, but it's really powerful. I recommend doing a daily journal. And I know this sounds like some kind of hippie thing, but it's not. And I do recommend using an actual paper and pen, or at least like I do, an iPad and an Apple Pencil. And so I physically with this hand, because I'm left-handed, I write down what's going on, right? And a journal is just a way to take the contents of your brain and often a lot of the stress that you're going through, and you're getting it out of your head and you're getting it on paper. And that's just such an awesome way to just get stuff that's bugging you down. And I've journaled for years. And so I have, and you can't see because it's behind the camera, on the bookshelf behind the camera, there's just a stack of my journals over the years. And the benefit of journaling is that I can go back to see what was I thinking about in 2014 or in 2010. And more often than not, when I do that, I'm like, wow, the things that were really bothering me all those years ago, it's really not a big deal, right? Either that person ended up getting fired, or that project ended up getting delayed anyway, or that thing that was bugging me so much turned out to be not a big deal. And by having that record, that gives me the hope that the things that are bugging me now, you know what, probably won't be a big deal in a year or in 3 years. And so just a great way to just do that. So it's just a cheap way to train your focus despite being in distractions, because while you're journaling, if you're writing it out, you really can't multitask, right? It's really hard to journal and check Twitter. It's really hard to journal and then put a selfie on Instagram. And so the act of writing things out, get those things out of your head. All right, so you might be thinking, okay, well, what about this burning down illness thing, right? What's a low cost way to do that? And I mentioned sleep, but I know even sleep can be hard to do. A simple low cost way to burn down illness and to invest in your health is just to take a walk, right? Take a walk. I hope that most of you are living in an area where you can take a walk. I know COVID-19 can make moving around somewhat problematic, but if you can, and I'm very lucky to be in an area where my wife and I take a walk almost at the end of every day after dinner. And we just walk around our neighborhood. And by doing that, we get our bodies working, we get our hearts pumping a little bit, our lungs are working. And just that little boost to our health is a great way for us to just get the stress leaving our bodies. And I found that while I'm on that walk, I can almost feel like my shoulders just kind of relax as we walk and we begin to talk, and I begin to feel the stress kind of draining out of my body. And that can be just such a powerful way to invest in your health. And so it's just simple, right? Take a walk. It's not as expensive as having a gym membership. You don't need special equipment. You don't need to invest in all these weights, right? It's just moving your body around in the physical world. That is something that can be surprisingly powerful. All right. So as software developers, again, I know that you all have a burnout chart that you use to track your work. But I really hope that you can find it as a great metaphor for managing stress and avoiding the dangers of burnout. And I really hope that you can take this framework that we've shared to protect your hearts, minds, and bodies. And I think that if you follow this framework, you'll be more productive, but not only that, you'll model burnout resistance to your colleagues. A lot of times, a lot of cultures become burnout cultures because there's no one modeling a better way. Everyone's modeling all the bad habits and all the statistics that I shared at the beginning of this presentation begin to make themselves known in your organization. And so by becoming someone who is burnout resistant, someone who manages the things that cause stress and lead to burnout, you'll be surprised that you'll see people taking notice of that. And then you'll see them begin to model those better behaviors and hopefully result in less burnout in your companies and in your teams. Building software requires motivated individuals. And I truly believe, and I've seen this working in my life, I've seen this working in the teams that I lead, by reaching out, removing distractions, and revitalizing yourself, they will improve what you can deliver to your company and to your end users. Healthy teams build healthy code, and burning down burnout will help you be a healthy member of your team. And if you're a manager, it will help you become a healthy role model for your team. And so I'll be rooting for you as you burn down the stresses in your life so that you can get rid of the stress, or at least get the stress into a managed state, and that you can become the best version of yourself at work and also at home. All right, this is a picture of my wife and me, because typically she does this with me. She couldn't be here tonight or this morning in Australia. This is how you can get to us on Twitter or on Instagram. Those are our primary things. When I'm not fasting from social media, you can find me on Twitter or on Insta. I really want to be in touch with all of you and keep this conversation going. And so I'm happy to continue talking about this on Twitter. Twitter is where I usually get more engaged than on Insta. So follow me, let's talk. But without being on Twitter, we can talk right now because I actually finished a lot earlier than I used to. Maybe I'm really excited. So we have lots of time for Q&A. So let's go ahead and get to it. What questions do you have? And I'm opening chat. And let's see. I don't see any questions. So I think you can unmute yourself and have at it.
It's not a question, but I just wanted to say, this is a really, really awesome talk, and I really like the tips that you give, and I just thought it's so relatable and just so relevant, especially at the moment.
Thank you, Michelle. Michelle, where are you located?
I'm in Melbourne, and
Okay.
I've been in my bedroom for about 7 months now.
So how are you dealing with that, right? Being kind of confined to your bedroom for that long. How are your stress levels doing?
To be honest, at the start of just before COVID started, I was actually going to move countries and start on a new adventure, but that didn't happen. I was able to change teams at work, and I found work that's more, I guess, aligned to my own values. And it's been really helpful in lowering stress, and then lowering the work stress has given me more motivation to do things like explore my neighborhood within 5K.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm so happy for you. I have left companies because I decided that, you know what, my mental health is more important than keeping these people happy. And I have almost always found that move, and I haven't done it a lot, but it's almost always been rewarding, and I've always been happy that I've been able to leave a toxic environment and find some place where I can flourish. And so good for you for being courageous enough to make that move and to do what's best for your career. So that's awesome. All right. Anyone else? What questions do you have?
Just on that, moving and managing burnout. I move too often because I get really burnt out or fed up in a place, and that's something I need to probably try and work on, where I get frustrated too easily and end up leaving jobs too quickly. And that happened during COVID. Actually, I think I ended up sort of just rage quitting my job because the company didn't respond that well to the situation. Like, the workload didn't change, but we reduced hours. Everybody's on 80% hours, but the workload went up, if anything. So that's probably a bad example because I feel I should have left that job. But at other places, I've regretted leaving it, but because I've just got burnt out and felt like I should walk away.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that I've never rage quitted before. I've come close, um, but I would say that, and you said, Garth, yourself, that there were times where like, oh, maybe I could have made it, made it work. What I would suggest doing is trying to develop the sense to kind of interrogate the reality of where you are, and this, and this is often usually something that I recommend doing when you're not sleepy, you're not hungry, right? You're not distracted by your biological functions. So when you're well rested and when you're well fed, think, okay, what's really going on? What are the true, pros and cons of what's happening now? You might say, you know what? Have a great team. I'm working in a stack. I'm not sure if you're a front end, back end, full stack developer. What about you, Garth?
Well, everything throughout the career. I'm a manager now.
Okay,
But
imagine. Okay, so even managers have technology stacks that they find to be cool. So you're like, I like this stack that we're working on. I like the people who are working for me. I may not like the CIO or the VP of engineering, but if you can find a way to just kind of list out the things that you like and then list out the things that you don't like and just kind of weigh them and just say, okay, if I quit now, then I may not get to see what this team can do, or I may not get to see this thing plan out. And what I try to do is that every company that I've worked at, and I've bounced around a little bit, what is the goal, right? Why am I at this company? What am I trying to achieve, right? And it could be something really just straightforward, like, hey, I'm making more money than I've ever made before, and I want to keep making that much money. Or it could be, what? I really want to see, can I reproduce myself, right? Can I take one of the people who are reporting to me and groom them into a representation of all of my strengths? And Gareth, I'm sure that you're a very effective manager, but can I do that, right? Can I duplicate myself? And so there might be some goal, and then usually if you can tie some goal to where you are in your career, then that usually helps you deal with the stresses and the dissatisfaction a little bit more, because you've aligned your goals with what you're doing. And I found that, I've been able to stay at places longer than maybe my emotions would tell me to stay there. And I've always been so happy that I did that, because that goal got achieved. And when I achieved that goal, then I was able to move on in a way that was more strategic and less emotional, or just because I was just unhappy. Does that make sense, Garth? Okay, cool. By the
yeah,
way, that's a great collection of bobbleheads, I guess, behind you. Very impressive.
so much nerd stuff. It's all been. I moved recently, and the wife was very strategic in making sure all of my shit is now in this room with me, and the rest of the place is now hers.
Sometimes distance is the key to a happy marriage. I've been married for over 18 years, and we've learned how to order things so that
How she wants, right?
what's that?
All the things how she wants, right?
You know,
That's the key.
I have this office I'm in. I have free reign. The other 90% of the house, I don't. So, and I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that.
Yeah.
All right. We have lots of times for more questions. Anyone else? Maybe Yasir or Yasser? Is that Yasir or Yasser?
It's Yasser.
Yasser, where are you in the world?
I'm based in Melbourne as well, same as Michelle.
Look at that. What up?
Yeah.
We're in the house. Represent.
What
do you think?
I have a funny question. Is your wife an actress?
She may look like one, but no, she's a college professor, actually. She's a PhD full professor. So for those of you who don't know, when you join a college, you're an associate professor, then you become, no, I forget it. I think it's associate, assistant, then full. When you get tenured, you become, I forget the order at the bottom, but she's made it to the top. So she's at the top of what you can be as a professor, at least in America. I'm not sure how the rest of the world does it. So she's not only lovely, she's brilliant. So I married someone much more attractive and smarter than I am. So I got lucky. Yeah.
I think there's a question in the chat.
Okay. And I'm trying to move here we go. All right. In this new remote environment where everyone is online, it's harder to sense check how people are doing, especially when they're burnt out but still delivering. Do you have any techniques to find out how they're really doing? So I'm going to answer this two ways, right? Because we have time, and normally in Q&A, right, it's like I got 10 minutes, I got to just kind of get it out and hope people get what I'm trying to share with them. But I have more time to be more thoughtful. So I'm an engineering manager. I lead a team of software developers. We're a full stack team, not full stack engineers, but we have 2 front end developers who work in React. We have 2 back end developers who I'm hiring a third one who work in, well, actually we're going to probably just be with 2. I'm probably not going to replace this person, but anyway, who work in PHP. We have a QA engineer, and then I partner with product managers and product designers, just kind of paint a picture of kind of the matrix of people that I'm working in. And so I'm responsible for the work of the team as their manager. We call ourselves coaches in my company, engineering coaches. A coach is just someone who has direct reports. And so I'm going to answer this as an engineering manager. And one critical tool, it seems simple. Thanks, Jasser. Appreciate it. Now that you got to drop off. 101s, right? Or 1-1, some people call them. And it is for me, weekly meeting with all my direct reports where we get together and really we talk about work a little bit, but the key thing is that a 101 is not a status report. I know a lot of you probably had these. One-on-ones are, I think, still an underutilized and underappreciated way for managers to check in with your team members, because one-on-ones are where, you know what, I am making a ton of space in my calendar for this engineer. And the one non-renewable resource that we all have is time. And so the time that I spend with my team, I'm not getting back. And so usually the most precious gift you can give to anyone is your total attention when you're spending time with them. And that's what one-on-ones are. And so because I've given them my full attention, and I have a technique and I have a set of questions that I go through to kind of understand how this engineer works and how they're built. But it's a key way for me to really check in on how they're doing and to gauge how they are. And it takes time, but by having effective one-on-ones, I get a sense of what is the baseline profile of this engineer. And over time, once I get that, I can detect when they're deviating from that profile. And when I see that deviation, I have a conversation. And I'm like, hey, what's going on? And I never try to diagnose or to say, oh, you're burned out, because you should never do that. But what you should do is just share observations like, hey, you've never been late to the stand-ups, but for the past week, you've been late to everyone. Or, you know what, normally your pull requests are extremely thoughtful. In fact, I share them with some of the junior engineers as this is how you write a great PR. But they become just like bare bones. And by doing that, I'm able to share those observations. And you'll be 95% of the time, they're like, yeah, my grandmother's not doing well, or, I'm having a fight with someone in my personal life, or, you know what, there's rumors that there's going to be layoffs, and can you tell me more about that? So we can get to those conversations. And so it's a simple tool, but if you are a manager and you're not having, if not weekly, fortnightly one-on-ones, then I really think you're missing out on a super valuable tool to keep your finger on the pulse of your team and to see how they're doing. And we're all living through so many crises, right? We have a global pandemic. At least in the United States, there's a lot of racial unrest. There's an election in, days from now. I went and voted today. And so, especially during those times, it's critical that managers understand what's normal for my developers. And then when things are really abnormal, you can really focus in on how they're responding to those abnormalities. So thanks for the question, Marcus. All right, Michelle. So do you want to say that out loud, or I'll read it? I assume that you typed it for a reason.
I typed it because I forgot. I was worried I'd forget it.
No. you want to read it out, or I'll read it
Oh.
out, or
Okay.
but-
My question was like, do you think that like as an employee conveying that you're burnt out due to the work scenario situation could hurt your career prospects? Like maybe it might make people think that you can't handle a higher level role because maybe we'll have more stress or something.
Yeah. So I'm going to answer that question. I forgot the other. I said I'm going to do it in two ways. To the previous question about being remote, I answered it as a manager. As a non-manager, I would say cultivate relationships with your colleagues. And I could say a lot about this, but typically you can find some way to connect with people. Maybe someone called that Game of Thrones reference in my talk, and so I always love that. Maybe you all love Game of Thrones. My team, we started a channel called a social channel in Slack. We talk about Star Trek, right? And what's going on with Star Trek Picard and Star Trek Discovery, because there are a lot of Star Trek fans. Your team might be able to geek out about beer, right? Maybe you brew your own beer, right? But find commonalities and common interests. I can promise you that there's probably something that at least one other person's really into, and form those relationships. And it's important to do this early, because there's a saying that you need to dig your well before you're thirsty, right? You want to build those relationships before you need them. And then by doing that, then when there's a crisis, then you'll have that relationship where you can have the conversation. So that's, if you're in IC, how you can do that. All right, Michelle, your question is, if I let my manager know that I'm burnt out, will that hurt my career prospects? That depends on a lot of variables. I think in a perfect world, you have an empathetic and supportive manager who realizes something really simple. We're all humans. We can only do so much. This work that most companies are doing demanding work, right? And we hire really good people because we have hard work that needs to get done. Writing software is complicated. And so it's important that managers, and I'm always aware that I'm asking my team members to engage in complexity every single day, every hour of the day. And that means that there's a time when everyone's going to get to a breaking point. So as a manager, and my style is very empathetic, very supportive, I'm always probing for that. And it is super helpful when someone tells me, you know what, I'm just not there today. And I am always willing to say, take the day off. Or if you need to take half a day, that's fine. Your mental health and your physical health is way more important than what we're doing now. And you know what? You'll be better. You'll better serve the company and what we're doing by taking care of yourself, right? That's far more better than having someone who just rage quits, right? Like Gareth, we talked about that. Like, I just can't take it anymore. I would rather you tell me you're getting burned out, and then we talk about it, and then I have some way to reorient your workload. I can hopefully take things off your plate. It's very important that I do that. Now, I would say it's very important that you have a track record, right? If you have a track record of being an engineer who delivers, right? You continually ship features. It's a lot easier to do that. So if you have a supportive manager and a track record, I'm happy to give you that time, because I know that when you're back, you'll be at your best. If you're not in an environment where you have that support, it's harder. If you're new to the company, if you had time to make that track record, it's harder. I would say that try to find people who aren't managers, but are colleagues, and then form those relationships. And you see me talk about relationships a lot because relationships are so important when dealing with burnout and stress. I would say try to do that. Try to find your community, either inside corporate walls or outside corporate walls, that you can lean on when you need help, right? So that's how I would say you can navigate those two extremes. Yes, Gareth, yes, I totally, yes, it will help more than hurt. All right, I think we are at the end of our time. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for the questions. I'm going to say we are done. I really have enjoyed this. I hope you enjoyed the rest of NDC Sydney. All right, everyone, follow me on Twitter if you have any questions. I would love to continue to interact with you. Let's keep the conversation going.